Welcome to another Modern Mind Ancient Book. Nick, Pete, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Good to be here again.
Here we go. Today we're going to do the Book of Nahum. Nahum? I don't know. How do people say it?
I think people say Nahum, but for the most part, they don't even mention it.
No.
This is not a book that most people talk about.
Nahum? Nahum? I don't know.
I think Nahum is probably more correct.
Yeah.
So, Nahum writes to Judah after the fall of Israel, the northern 10 tribes, in 722 BC. The prophet speaks of the avenging, judicial, wrathful, holy character of God, which loathes the unrepentant Ninevites. We've heard Nineveh before.
I was just to say, the unrepentant Ninevites, what happened to the Ninevites that Jonah was dealing with? Very interesting, and because I forgot about this book that no one talks about, I looked this up. We'll get to that later, but it was some interesting stuff that happened in doing my research process.
So, at the time of Jonah, Nineveh was a very large and successful power.
Right.
But they weren't really messing with the Canaanites. They were messing with the west side of the world. The Elamites and the Aramites and the proto kind of Babylon.
Right.
Babylon. They got crushed by them. The early Babylon period. The Persians hadn't quite happened yet, but Assyria was a very much powerful nation.
Right.
A Mesopotamian adopter of the Mesopotamian worldview culture, but heavily dependent on violence for adherence and payments. There was no money. So if you wanted things, you had to rely on trade or good relations, or if you were the Assyrians, you would just go kill people. Take it. Now it's coming full circle. God loathes the unrepentant Ninevites who have repressed the people around them. With their power and their idolatry. They were taking people. So it hasn't happened yet, but we're going to mention it a bit. So when Judah was taken by the Babylonians, they were just brought to Babylon. When the Assyrians took the northern 10 tribes, they took them everywhere. To the farthest reaches and separated. No, they would keep family units together, but they wouldn't keep large
communities. They were separated,
Everything was separated.
They were dispersed instead of relocated.
For political and military reasons. If you scatter a bunch of people, they can't unite. Different cultures and stuff. Smart people, just brutal. So, Nahum clearly depicts the details of the judgment of God and how the city will be brought to ruin. Meaning Nineveh. The judgment on Nineveh is just because all of her blasphemous sins. God mocks them by challenging the Ninevites to prepare for a war which will soon destroy them and cause their enemies to celebrate over their devastation.
Which is one of the funniest things any of the prophets wrote. I love any place in the Bible where God gets sassy, but especially something like this just cracks me up. That would be like if Roger was like, hey Nick, we're gonna have a fist fight. You might want to lift some weights for a while. And I'd be like, why bother, dude? You're just gonna flatten me. God's like, get ready.
It's over, dude.
Pack a lunch, get up early.
Get the men ready. Prepare yourselves, oh great Nineveh.
Right.
Because who was coming? The Babylonians.
Right.
The Proto-Persians. The Elamites. Aramites. Basically, everybody that they had been oppressing and brutalizing was finally like, oh, we're good now. Yeah, we're done. Game's over.
Yeah, I've had enough of this.
I've had enough of this. Now it only took 1,000 years.
But still, God waited 1,000 years to make that joke. That's pretty cool. He was playing the long game.
He was playing the long game. So, we don't know much about the ministry or the person of Nahum. The text mentions that he was an Elkoshite, which indicates that he was from a city by the name of Elkosh. 4 possible locations have been purposed for this site, though none of these can be proven. The first suggests and identifies Elkosh with the modern village of El-Kush, north of Mosul, so in Iraq, where there is a tomb that alleges to be the burial place of Nahum. This view suggests Nahum is a descendant of the families of the exiles that were deported from Israel during the conquering of the 10 northern tribes by Sargon in 722. They were taken to the Mesopotamian area, right? And while he was there, he just happened to notice that the Babylonians are, they have a whole coalition.
Yeah.
Hey, Nineveh. This is what the Lord says.
Yeah.
Now, at this time, where was Assyria? They were busy. They were busy in Canaan, and they were busy with Egypt. So it was the perfect time to do this, because Assyria was one of those nations that always on the warpath, but not a very large army. So they would have to go, and then go back, and then go, and then go back, and then go back, and then go, and just keep on reconquering.
They were good at conquering, not at occupying.
Not at occupying it. Well, that wasn't their goal to occupy.
Right.
It was their goal to be as brutal as possible and make people pay. And it's likely that Nahum was from Israel, and that the word of the Lord came to him in particularly that way because he was in the area to see the preparations. And then God spoke, and there he went. So the prophet had intimate knowledge of Nineveh and Assyrian culture. He used Assyrian words, which, you know, he was in captivity, so it makes sense that he would be able to
pick up the lingo of the land.
Absolutely. You'd have to adapt. Although these arguments indicate the prophet's familiarity with the city and culture, it is not necessary that this knowledge he gained only through living near the city of Nineveh. Such knowledge and vocabulary were not exclusive to the natives of Assyria proper. Nahum demonstrates a significant knowledge of Thebes in Egypt, but no one would argue from this that he also lived on the Nile in Egypt. But the northern 10 tribes, when Assyria went down to conquer Egypt, tried to rebel, and that's when they got conquered. Because originally they were like, no, we're good, we'll pay you tribute. And then when the Assyrians went down south to deal with Egypt, that's when they tried to rebel. Right. The other site that's possible for El-Kosh is in the Galilee, and it's called El-Kasi, or El-Kos. Jerome suggested this place in the 4th century, but he offers no supporting evidence, so it's not necessarily...
Right. The name sounded kind of similar. So.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? There's Capernaum on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. That's a popular recommendation because it means the village of Nahum. Those who support this position point out the writer's knowledge of northern regions such as Carmel, Bashan, and Lebanon. A fourth possibility is El-Kasai, a village of Judah. It's suggested by the word pseudopiphanus. This view is supported by the acceptance of Nahum's ministry to the inhabitants of Judah and the suggestion that he is primarily interested in the triumph of the southern kingdom over the Assyrians. The fact that none of these views has any strong evidence suggests that no dogmatic determination should be made. I kind of like the one that he was taken into captivity and saw the developing alliance.
I think the conclusion, though, is just one of those things where it doesn't really matter to the message. It's cool to talk about. There's different reasons that people can offer for why it may be there or maybe here, but it doesn't have any bearing on the message. So,
although he was real. Now, did he have like a pseudonym? Because his name is interesting. It means to be sorry or to console oneself. It's comfort or consolation. This name certainly exemplifies the ministry of Nahum, as he was able to comfort and console the people of Judah by assuring them that the Lord would destroy Nineveh, their enemy, and that the Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows who will take refuge in him. Although we know nothing of Nahum's work outside of this book, it is safe to assume that he probably had a preaching ministry. He was a contemporary with Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, Isaiah, and Micah. His knowledge of world events demonstrates his theological interest in the providential work of God on behalf of the people. Again, a very, very rich time of prophecy.
His knowledge of world events, too, probably indicates he was of at least an educated class.
Oh, for sure.
He wasn't common.
Not a common man.
Right.
Now, these were prestigious positions in general.
Right.
Nahum does not date his vision to the reign of any king, so a date must be determined from internal evidence. 3 events of the book help to establish the date. The first is a reference commonly accepted as referring to Sennacherib and his invasion of Judah in the early 700s. Nahum predicts the death of Sennacherib and the cutting off of his idols and image. Sennacherib was assassinated by his 2 sons, Adramelech and Sharezer, while he was worshipping the temple of his god Nisroch. The sons fled to the region of Ararat and Esarhaddon. Another son reigned after him. Sennacherib's death took place in 681. A second event was the destruction of the city of Noamon, or Thebes, Luxor, Karnak, in Egypt. Thebes was destroyed in 663 BC by the Assyrians under the leadership of Ashur-bani-pal. he was the last ruler.
Right.
Yeah, and I gotta show you guys this song later. If anybody's into math rock or just like generally nerdy funny things, you have to look up the song The Mesopotamians by They Might Be Giants. It's about a rock band made up of Sargon, Hammurabi, Ashurbanipal, and Gilgamesh. And it is so funny.
The third major event is the fall of Nineveh. Nahum prophesies of the fall of Nineveh in great detail. Nineveh fell to the united military coalition of the Medes, the Scythians, and the Babylonians. The destruction of Nineveh took place in 612 BC. Thus, it is possible to frame the writing of Nahum by these events. If the prophecy of chapter 1, 11 through 14 is accepted as a reference to Sennacherib, the beginning of Nahum must be placed around 681. This creates a difficulty because Nahum speaks of the destruction of Noami, which was 663, as a past event. It may be better to see 1, 11 through 14 as a general reference to the nation of Israel and her king who were cut off. Assyria. And of her king who were cut off, as well as the idolatrous gods. The NIV translation inserts the name of Nineveh into the text. Therefore, the dating of Nahum is established as beginning after the destruction of Noami, so 663, and ending before the fall of Nineveh in 612. Nick, you want to take historical background?
Yeah, but before I do that, I want to explain something that happened to me in this research in case anyone who's listening does the same thing. I wanted to know what went on with Nineveh because I didn't remember all of this story of Nahum. So we had just done Jonah. I've known the story of Jonah since I was a little kid, thinking, what the heck happened with Nineveh? So I asked my Brave browser what happened with Nineveh after they repented. And it basically came back and said they did great. They were phenomenal. They turned to God and it was all wonderful. And it says, what happened to Nineveh after Jonah? The point of this story is not that there isn't information to be found on the internet, just don't trust AI. Not because there's grand conspiracy, because it didn't understand my question. I asked after Jonah and it came back with the same result. And I said, what happened to Nineveh after Jonah in the time of Nahum? And it came back and said, they went the way of the Assyrians. So you have to ask such a specific question to get a useful answer.
That's right.
That it's better to just scroll down, just take the extra 5 seconds and look at something that was written by a human.
Or plug for Logos. It's a wonderful program.
Not a sponsor of this show, but hey, if they're listening.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. I've got a lot of money in your logo, so if you want to help me out, I'd sure appreciate it. So Logos is a wonderful program. They have scholarly sets that you can have, and they also have basic Bible study sets, but you get digital libraries that are searchable. They also have audiobooks and classes and lessons. There's a lot of online resources that are available to you. Multiple volumes, commentaries work, single volume commentary works. Those are the places you really kind of want to go.
Yeah, here I was trying to save time, and look what it did to us. It's a valuable lesson for everyone else. So.
Or you might find out that the Anunnaki were aliens that were here to get gold. I don't know what it was all about.
I didn't need the AI to
Okay, so historical background there.
Historical background. So Nahum would have known of the fall of the 10 northern tribes of Israel to the brutal attacks of the Assyrians in 722 BC. The campaign of Sennacherib, how do you say that?
I think it's Sennacherib. That's what I think.
What Roger said, against Judah and Yahweh's deliverance of Hezekiah and Jerusalem from his hands in 701 BC was no doubt a historical event in which Nahum took great comfort. The rise of Assyria to its greatest height under the capable leadership of Ashurbanipal, the grandson of Sennacherib,
that'll work,
would have been a great source of concern and prayer to Nahum. Hobart Freeman writes, Ashurbanipal's wars were numerous and characterized by ruthlessness and cruelty. He boasted of his violence and shameful atrocities. Boasted of them. That's interesting. Which included, among other things, the tearing off of limbs of his victims, putting out their eyes, impaling them, boiling them in tar, and skinning them alive. Assyria prided itself on its cruel and violent atrocities. The number of corpses and the pyramids of human heads left behind as monuments to its destruction. Nahum also knew of the fall of Thebes in Egypt and the foolishness of depending on a foreign alliance to Israel rather than trusting in the strong arm of Yahweh.
The fact that Nineveh fell after a siege is like just punishment for what Assyria was known for. They would encamp, they would take all of the resources all around. Anybody who was outside the city walls would be brutally treated. The atrocities of their violence would clearly be displayed to the city inhabitants in disgusting ways.
Not only are you going to die, but you're going to suffer the whole time you're dying.
Takes away the will to fight, too.
Then they would build ramparts. They were excellent at building ramps that would go up high enough that they could fire down into the city. And then eventually they would just drop ladders over and then walk right in the city. But they waited until you were skin and bones and starving to death. Because you could either, at the beginning, give up and pay tribute, and then it was fine. Or you could die. They were very, very fearsome. The worst of the worst.
There's a special level of disgust. It wasn't just murder, as if that's not bad enough. It was brutal.
And on public display.
Yeah. Almost like October 7th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That type of stuff.
And the bragging about it.
Yeah. The videos. Leon Wood summarizes well the character of the Judean kings in stating Manasseh was the son and successor of the good king of Hezekiah. He ruled 50 years, the longest of any king in either Judah or Israel. Manasseh did not follow the pattern of his godly father, but pursued the ways of wicked Ahaz, his grandfather. He restored the cultic objects that Hezekiah destroyed. He placed altars of Baal throughout the land and recognized the Ammonite deity Moloch by sacrificing his children in the Valley of Hinnom. You'll see that Valley of Hinnom Moloch thing, and every time you do, they're burning kids. He approved various forms of pagan divination and erected an image of the Canaanite goddess Asherah. Asherah was the female consort to the male god Moloch.
But what happened to the people who protested?
Those who protested, he killed. Manasseh is said to have caused the people to do more evil than the nations whom God had dispossessed from the land centuries before.
And that's saying something. That's
Really?
crazy. Caused them to become more evil than the most brutal people who were ever to do evil before.
The covenant framework of the Bible comes out very dramatically at this moment. Because did he cut heads off and stack them in piles that look like pyramids? No, he burned kids. But he didn't do that. Did he dismember people and stick them on poles? Not really. But what did he do that was worse than anything? Profaned the covenant of God in the place of his temple. What did he do in the temple? He put Baal statues, the storm rider, the cloud rider, the one who gives rain. But God gives rain. So is it Baal or is it God? Which one? He profaned the covenant. The worst thing that can happen in the biblical ancient mind is to profane your covenant agreement. So the worst possible thing that happened here, it wasn't so much violence and nasty. It was that Israel was never, ever destined to be a nation that followed anything, anyone, for any reason other than the Lord their God, the one who witnessed, saved them, took them. They were slaves, and he set them free. He gave them a land. He dispossessed people. He gave them a place to be. They were supposed to be forever grateful, not to be slaves in Egypt, but instead to be a kind, compassionate, religious group of people who acted rightly on behalf of God by keeping the law. Profaning the law is the worst thing that could ever happen.
So this is a classic case of, I don't approve of what those kids are doing, but you know better.
You know better. That's the point. That's why it was the worst thing. Good summary. The city of Nineveh. You got that?
The city of Nineveh was naturally fortified by the Tigris River. It was a great city, walled with massive guards up to 100 feet thick. That's a pretty thick wall, 100 feet thick.
It almost seems like overkill, but then when you know that they're going up against the Assyrians, you realize it's still not enough.
The walls were surrounded by a moat, so you drowned before you got to the wall. Even.
Yeah, 150 feet wide, 60 feet deep.
Yep. Circumference of 8 miles, as well as another outer wall of 60 miles. That's a pretty big place.
Very fortified. They wouldn't stand up to the United States Air Force, though.
No.
I don't know why I said that.
It is true.
Yeah.
It's just not fair.
Yeah. They didn't even do very well standing up to the Assyrians and stuff.
The Babylonians.
Yeah, I said that. I said Assyrians before.
The Babylonians are coming.
Yeah.
So, point taken.
They had all the towers too to shoot from.
Well,
the arrows.
They trusted in their strength. But when is strength ever enough? There's always somebody younger. There's always somebody stronger. Right. Mm-hmm. There's always some technology better. There's always some putting bombs in pagers and cell phones. You know, there's always some weird thing. Somebody's more innovative. Somebody's more ruthless. Somebody's stronger. Or in this case, they were just angry enough after 1,000 years of reign that they were like, "Oh, we're just throwing bodies at you. You're dying." Yeah. And that's it. Game's over.
Yeah.
Now, having a 60-mile circumference and then an 8-mile circumference, I mean, you could fight outside of the walls, but inside of the walls. They set up great fortifications, but why wasn't it enough according to the Bible? The King of heaven and earth, the Lord of hosts, said, "You're done," because they would not repent.
Right.
Not like Jonah. The recipients of this book were Jews living in Judea during a period of Assyrian domination. They would require lots of grain, lots of money. When they're in town, you're going to pay.
Yeah.
It's not fair. Judah did bow the knee. They were paying tributes. The spiritual revival and reprieve from Assyrian persecution that their forefathers had experienced, which was brought about by the preaching of Jonah, was only a faint memory to their generation. These Jews are exhausted by the demands of life under Assyrian oppression. They know that the Assyrians captured the 10 northern tribes and deported them to other countries. They live in fear that someday they're going to go to. So you want to read this as someone who fears a brutal nation, and you pray that the Lord will render his righteous judgment by avenging their acts of brutality on their own heads. You read so that you might learn the attributes of your covenant God. This would be a remnant who would read it this way. But the covenant part, again, is absolutely a part of these documents. One has to take into account the covenantal nature of all of these documents and how central and paramount it is to actually understanding the documents. You want to understand God's awesome power so that the power of the Assyrians does not cause you to tremble. This is to be comfort in a time of problem. What's the argument?
Yahweh will take vengeance on Nineveh because of the immorality and idolatry, and rescue and restore those who take refuge in him. Holds true today.
Yeah.
The purpose is to comfort Judah and encourage hope that Yahweh will deliver them from Assyrian oppression and restore their nation.
This is actually quite interesting to me because, so these arguments and stuff, like we read these in these ancient documents, and I don't think it's readily apparent what the connection is. Let's take into consideration 184 ballistic missiles were shot at Israel. These are missiles that go to the edge of space and then barrel down with heavy warheads.
Right.
They're sophisticated technology, and they didn't land. None of them. A sliver of land with 15 million people. None of them died. Call it what you want, listener. I don't know what to tell you, but God will take vengeance. That's all I'm saying. The key verse, Nahum 1:7-8. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who take refuge in him. But with an overflowing flood, he will make a complete end of its sight and will pursue his enemies into darkness. That's what happened in Nineveh. That's what happened with numerous places. Yeah. The fall of Nineveh was so great that Alexander the Great didn't even know the city was there.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah.
He was right there, and it was so obliterated that it was just like, what's that field, man?
Yeah.
Yeah, what are these like remnants of walls?
Figured they could have done something with it.
Thanks, boys.
Okay.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for listening to this. Yeah. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend. If you didn't like it, share it with an enemy. We'll catch you next time.
Right.
ModernMindAncientBook@gmail.com.